Hello, my name is David McDonald. I am Lincoln and Silas McDonald's pops, and it is an honor to be asked to read to you this week as you celebrate the birthday of the great Dr. Seuss. Today I'm going to be reading a book that is not by Dr. Seuss, but it's a book about Dr. Seuss. The name of the book is The Boy on Fairfield Street, How Ted Geisel Grew Up to Become Dr. Seuss. It's a book that was written by Kathleen Cruel, and it's got paintings by Steve Johnson and Lou Francher. The paintings on the page, you'll notice, are by those two fellows, but a lot of drawings, all the drawings in the book are drawings that were done by Dr. Seuss himself. And so thanks for joining me as we read the book. Once upon a time, there lived a boy who feasted on books and was wild about animals. He lived in 1904, or he was born in 1904, and lived in the best of all possible places, 74 Fairfield Street in Springfield, Massachusetts. The gray three-story house was exactly 3 blocks from the public library, and it was just 6 blocks from the zoo. This boy loved lots of things besides reading and animals. Sledding, doodling, trying on costumes, singing around the piano with his family, exploring the green fields of nearby Forest Park. All in all, he excelled at fooling around. No one on Fairfield Street could have said how Ted Geisel, that funny boy, would turn out. No one in the world could have, especially Ted. At dinner, Ted's family gathered around the huge oak table. Often they talked about the animals in the zoo. Ted's father, Theodore Geisel, worked in the family business, but he also helped out at the zoo and eventually was superintendent of parks, which meant he actually ran the zoo. Ted would eat baked beans and bratwurst and thrill to stories of stubborn bears and chattering monkeys, prowling lions, and wild wolves. At night, their hoots and cries sometimes found their way into his dreams. Ted's mother, Henrietta Seuss Geisel, helped him find books at the library. Her dream was to get Ted and his sister, Marnie, into college, as the first in their family to go. Perhaps Ted might even grow up to become Dr. Geisel. Each night she lulled them to sleep with stories in nonsense verse, like the names of pies: apple, mince, lemon, peach, apricot, pineapple, blueberry, coconut, custard, and squash. Ted would listen curled up with a gift from her, his first stuffed animal, a plump dog he had named Theophrastus. Ted celebrated his birthdays with noisy parties of dozens of neighborhood children wearing funny costumes and hats. In the winter, he built tunnels in the snow in the backyard and went sledding and ice skating in Forest Park. When spring arrived, he marched his toy soldiers around on the front porch with his 3-legged dog, Rex, for company. It was a bulldog. He and his best friend Bill would roam the neighborhood. Neighbors were always interesting to him. A family named the Bumps, a dentist who treated patients in his own home. 2 women who didn't mind when Ted practiced his bugle. They were hard of hearing. The nosy man across the street, he ran the local newspaper, the Springfield Union. Ted and Bill and the other Fairfield Street boys invented ways to test each other. Like chin-ups or ear-wiggling contests, all year round they explored Forest Park with its lily ponds, trout streams, bike paths, and tennis courts. During the summers at Beach Cottage, Ted went fishing with his father, built sand castles, learned to swim, dug in the sand for clams. The family sang songs or told stories at night, usually outside, where Ted could count the fireflies and stars. Parades around Springfield were happy days. There was so much to take in: circus acrobats, flashing marching bands with trumpets blasting and drums pulsing, people twirling by on bicycles of all kinds. Ted began noticing that he didn't really fit in around Springfield. He spoke German as well as English. His grandparents were German immigrants, and the Giesels were always the outsiders compared with the families that had lived there for generations. Events in Europe were causing anger at German Americans here. Thoughtless children at school teased Ted for having a German name, singing German songs, eating German food, and whatever else they could think of. Even having a dog with 3 legs. Sometimes they chased him or beat him up. It was on the playground that Ted developed his strong awareness of injustice. On top of that, the Giesel family business was a brewery. Plenty of Springfield citizens frowned on people who drank beer. Nor did Ted always fit in at home. Both of his parents were skilled at rifle shooting and won trophies for it. Every morning his father practiced shooting holes in paper targets for half an hour. He was always urging Ted to take up target shooting or some competitive sport. But Ted was bored by shooting, and he avoided athletics whenever he could. Gym teachers sighed at his lack of muscles. Certainly, no one he knew seemed to like drawing as much as he did. Sometimes he even drew on his bedroom walls with his crayons. Everyone was horrified. Well, except his mother. He drew the animals he saw at his father's zoo. He drew imaginary creatures. He drew whatever popped into his head. Like his friends, he adored Crazy Cat and other comic strips. Ted would run to the corner each night to greet his father, then grab the comic pages from his father's newspaper. One day, when Ted was 12 and was doodling as usual, he found himself sketching a funny little cartoon of a man reeling in a giant fish. His parents helped him enter the drawing in a contest run by the Springfield Union. Ted won first prize. But when he started taking an art class in high school, the only one he ever took, his teacher scolded him for breaking rules. She thought he was fooling around. The day she warned him he would never be successful at art, he quit the class. Ted did break rules. He was starting to notice when rules didn't make sense, and he always knew his art broke the rules. His biggest crime was exaggerating things. The creatures he drew had ears 9 feet long. His horses had wings. His cows could fly as well. His animals looked like plants. His plants looked like animals. He just had this unusual way of looking at the world. And more often than not, this seemed like a bad thing to other people. Ted turned 13 in 1917, the year the United States declared war on Germany and entered World War I. Luckily, no one could question his patriotism. He was a proud Boy Scout, selling United States Liberty bonds to support the war effort. Walking door to door around Springfield, he collected so much money that he became one of the top 10 bond-selling scouts in town. Now he was going to receive an award. Ted stood on a platform in front of City Hall, grinning at his family and the thousands of Springfieldians who turned out that Sunday morning. Ex-President Theodore Roosevelt stirred up the crowd with a speech, then walked down the line of scouts, handing out medals, congratulating each one. Ted stood up straight. But when the former president came to him, Roosevelt blurted, "What's this little boy doing here?" It seemed Roosevelt had only 9 medals, and Ted was the 10th scout in line. No one knew what to do. After a painful silence, Ted was guided off stage. His usual instinct was to be awkward in public, and after that day, he tried to avoid being in public at all. Ted's parents soon learned that he was never going to be studious like his sister Marty. In class, he doodled instead of taking notes. Sometimes he skipped class altogether to go to the movies. Even his mother frowned at him then, warning that people who went to movies in the daytime ended up as failures, not doctors. In high school, he played the banjo, wrote stories, and drew cartoons for the school paper. Excuse me. All the while getting his classmates to laugh. They voted him class artist and class wit. Ted did have one teacher who encouraged him, his favorite English teacher. He urged Ted to apply to his old school, Dartmouth College, in nearby New Hampshire. Many around Springfield were astonished when Ted did make it to Dartmouth, fulfilling his mother's dream. In college, everyone also admired his talent for silliness. He was clearly gifted, though no one knew at exactly what. It wasn't as if men could doodle for a living. His best times were writing verse and drawing for the Jack-o'-lantern, the college humor magazine. But after one too many parties with his fraternity brothers, the college forced him to resign as Jack-o'-lantern's editor. Ted got around this punishment by writing for the magazine under another name. Partly for his own amusement, he had been experimenting with signing different names to his work. It was at Dartmouth that he started using Seuss as his mother's maiden name and his own middle name. Classmates on their way to becoming doctors and lawyers and bankers voted Ted Giesel the least likely to succeed. After college, he was plagued with more doubts than ever. He had no money, no job prospects. He did have a place to go, but he could always move back to his parents' house in Springfield, but that would be a step backward. Was he forever to be the boy on Fairfield Street? Stalling for time, he applied for a prestigious grant to study English literature at Oxford University in England and led his parents to believe he was getting it. Unfortunately, someone else got the grant. But Ted's father had already bragged to the editor at the Springfield Union, which published the big news. To save face, Ted's father came up with the money to send his son, the exaggerator, to Oxford anyway. Now, Ted was supposed to do some serious work, studying early Anglo-Saxon poetry and the plays of William Shakespeare. Instead, he was off doodling and scrawling little poems as usual. Then one day, a classmate he had a crush on looked over his shoulder. She whispered in his ears alone, "That's a very good flying cow." Oddly enough, this one remark suddenly put the world into focus for Ted. This was him, a guy who loved to draw animals and loved to write verse. With more encouragement from his classmate, Ted decided to leave school. He moved back to Fairfield Street for the time being. All of his energy would now go into finding ways to make money doing what he loved, not what others might want him to do. Ted began flooding the mailrooms of New York magazines and newspapers with funny articles and animal drawings, hundreds of them, an entire zoo of crazy animals and birds and beasts. Then one morning in July, the postman rang the bell at 74 Fairfield Street with an acceptance letter. The Saturday Evening Post, a major magazine, offered him $25 for a cartoon of two American tourists riding a camel. Ted let out a hoot and ran upstairs to tell his parents, with a little exaggeration, that the Post was going to publish all of his drawings from now on. Instead, other magazines started wanting his drawings of creatures, and it all began to seem like a dream. Ted's response? He sent out more drawings than ever. Fantastical beasts, imaginary settings. He took to signing his latest work, Dr. Theophrastus Seuss, or Dr. Seuss. The name tickled him. It had that doctor ring to it that he and his family liked so much. Plus, then he could save Ted Giesel for his real name for his great works that he would dash off in some vague future. At first, people around the country who saw these new cartoons by Dr. Seuss wrote letters of complaint. A prisoner on death row wrote to say he didn't mind dying if Ted's work was the best publishers could do. But he also got fan mail. Some people seemed to really appreciate his work. In fact, one day, he even received a request for his autograph from a 12-year-old boy. Ted glowed for days. This letter pleased him to no end. Not so much the autograph part, it was that a young person had asked for it. Was it possible that his work could be good for children? The boys and girls now growing up on Fairfield Street? Now that sounded interesting. It meant he could share his own love of reading, animals, and justice. He could even promote fooling around. By the time August arrived, Ted was packing his suitcases. It was time to say farewell to his parents and to take a train to the big city, New York, to find his own place to live. He found it, a tiny apartment in Greenwich Village. And that Monday, Ted Giesel got busy at his old wooden drawing board. He had his colored pencils, his paints, his typewriter, many erasers, and his furry stuffed dog, Theophrastus. He had all day to work and all night if he needed it. He was prepared to work hard. He was 22 years old, and his future looked bright. That's the end of Kathleen Krall's book. But I'd like to tell you some more things about Dr. Seuss that go beyond Fairfield Street. Theodore Seuss Giesel was born on March the 2nd, 1904, in Springfield, Massachusetts, and spent his childhood there. At 22, he moved to a studio apartment in New York City, the center of the publishing world. He soon found steady work as a staff writer and artist for The Judge, the world's wittiest weekly, as it called itself. To celebrate, he went out for a spaghetti dinner with the woman who had told him, "That's a very good flying cow." Her name was Helen Palmer. Ted married her when he was 23, and she never stopped encouraging him. Ted moved on to advertising, drawing bizarre bugs for Flit, a popular insect repellent. This work left him with a lot of money and free time and more energy than ever. He wrote an alphabet book starring his weird animals. Every publisher rejected it. A few years later, while coming back from Europe on a ship, Ted was distracted by the rhythm of the ship's engines. The rhythmic phrase, "And to think I saw it on Mulberry Street," popped into his head. He remembered the street name from Springfield, and he used it to create a children's story that was rejected by 37 publishers. The 38th, where an old Dartmouth classmate worked, published it in 1937. Ted was 33 years old. Back in Springfield, neighbors worried about this new book, "And to think I saw it on Mulberry Street" by Dr. Seuss, was some kind of nosy account of real people and their medical problems. But Ted had taken his memory of parades around Springfield and constructed a fantasy about a boy whose fascination is too wild for adults. The book made a little money, but reviews were fantastic. Ted kept up his advertising work and continued trying out children's books ideas. One morning, he noticed a stranger wearing a rather pompous hat on the train from Springfield to New York. He began thinking up a story that involved 48 hats, adding more and more until he had the 500 hats of Bartholomew Cubbins. Another morning, a breeze blew the sketches around on his drawing board, and an elephant suddenly appeared to be sitting on a tree. This was the birth of Horton Hatches the Egg. During World War II, Ted joined the Army and was sent to Hollywood, where he wrote documentaries for the military. His first post-war book was McElligot's Pool, which he dedicated to his father, the fisherman. It remains many people's favorite Dr. Seuss book and was the first to win a Caldecott Honor Citation from the American Library Association. Another Caldecott Honor book followed, Bartholomew and the Oblek, and then a third, If I Ran the Zoo, which came out of his experiences at the Forest Park Zoo. Reviewers raved that Dr. Seuss books were not like any others previously published for children. They were incredibly funny, with a momentum that propelled readers to the end. They were always respectful toward children, but not always respectful toward authority, the rule makers. By 1948, Ted and Helen had moved into a large house in La Jolla, California. Ted's studio overlooked the Pacific Ocean, but he usually kept his desk turned away from the view. Surrounded by doodles with Theophrastus, always near his drawing board. He worked every day of the week, starting morning at 9 o'clock. Draft after draft, sketch after sketch. The creative processes boiled down to two things. He believed: time and sweat. Sometimes he wasn't satisfied with his work until midnight. He wrote and drew to please himself. He was happy when the results pleased others, though he occasionally felt a little awkward about being known only as a children's book writer. As the years went by, his great works for adults didn't happen. The year was 1957. It was Ted's electric year. 1957, that was the year I was born. One day, his publisher gave him a challenge to write a story using a list of the words first graders would need to learn to read, with just 225 of the words. He wrote The Cat in the Hat. The book did not come to him in a flash. It took him a year to write, but it went on to instant success. At age 53, he would never have to worry about money again. That same year, How the Grinch Stole Christmas appeared, another book over which he sweated, but that also became an instant success, an instant classic. 3 years later, his publisher bet Ted $50 that he could not write an entire book using only 50 words. The result, you know the book, you've probably read it, Green Eggs and Ham. For many years, his most popular book. Millions of children all over the world made the switch from not a reader to I can read while reciting the tale of Sam I Am. Dr. Seuss became a beloved icon. But Ted Geisel wasn't born Dr. Seuss. Instead, the birth of Dr. Seuss was a long process, not all of it comfortable, of searching for a focus. After he started beginner books with The Cat in the Hat, he invented another name, Theo Lessig, Geisel spelled backwards, that he used for some books he wrote, but did not illustrate. Helen died in 1967, and Ted married Audrey Stone Diamond. As he grew older, his books openly became more serious. He called The Lorax, which came out of his anger at pollution, his favorite. It was published in 1971, but took 10 years to become as popular as his other books. In 1974, a newspaper published a piece called Richard M. Nixon, Will You Please Go Now? It was a parody of Ted's book Marvin K. Mooney, Will You Please Go Now, used with his permission. 9 days later, President Nixon, embroiled in the Watergate scandal, resigned. In 1984, The Butter Battle Book, Ted's creative response to the race for nuclear arms, came out. He started calling it his best book. You're Only Old Once, which is about old age, was published on his 82nd birthday. That year, he returned to Springfield, strolling down Mulberry Street, visiting the owners of his old house on Fairfield Street. Hundreds of children gathered to chant, "We love you, Dr. Seuss." Stage fright had remained a problem for him, and he avoided the spotlight whenever possible. But on this day, he walked through the crowds, shaking hands, and could be seen wiping away tears. In 1990, his fastest-selling book, Oh, the Places You Will Go, was published. It contained echoes of many of his previous books. He had been awarded a special Pulitzer Prize, plus honorary doctorates from 7 universities, including Dartmouth, his alma mater. His books sold hundreds of millions of copies, the best-selling children's books ever. He often credited life on Fairfield Street for all he had accomplished. He gave money away to libraries, to art museums, scholarship funds, charities, and of course, zoos. On September 24th, 1991, when he died at the age of 87, many people felt as if they had lost a close personal friend. In Springfield today, you can visit the Dr. Seuss National Memorial Sculpture Garden. And wherever you live, you can read his books. All are still in print. Dr. Seuss was a great author, and I hope you've enjoyed not only hearing the story that was written by Ms. Kathleen Kroll, but also then hearing a little bit more about his biography. A boy who grew up and lived his dream, who wrote lots and lots of books. I got to tell you, I think my favorite book that Dr. Seuss wrote is The Snitches. In any case, thanks for listening. I'm sure you've got your most favorite book. And again, thank you for listening, and hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the reading of The Boy on Fairfield Street, how Ted Giesel grew up to become Dr. Seuss. Hope you have a great day. The choice is yours. I hope that you choose to have a wonderful, great day.